situation, the postponements, the cancellations. Shout out to the XFL. Rest in peace. One thing I wanted to talk about here, though, that really broke pretty late in the free agency window is this move of Brandin Cooks moving over to the Texans. Alex, do you have any thoughts on him from a fantasy standpoint? How does it affect Deshaun Watson and the Texans' overall offense? Any thoughts on the Cooks move?
Yeah, let's break it down. First things first, I'm sure, the XFL didn't have global pandemic on their risk analysis, but obviously, it's been tough with coronavirus, so across the globe. So we really are keeping everyone in our thoughts and prayers, and hopefully this content can help just provide some sort of distraction to that as we all get excited for the NFL season. So also, if you haven't yet, hit the subscribe button. We're dropping great content every week. We've had really good player breakdowns, player highlights, and then obviously the pod and some of the fantasy football content there as well. We're breaking down every move that happens in the offseason, and it's going to keep going into the season. So hit that subscribe button if you have not yet. If you're watching on Jackson Kruger's channel, be sure to hit his subscribe button as well. But let's get into this Cooks trade. It shocked me. I thought it might be a late April Fool's joke. Steph, I know there was the rumors about Cooks during the flurry of moves that were happening in free agency, but this one, the timing was just interesting. You texted me, I think I was minding my own business, like eating dinner, and you texted me, Cooks to the Texans in all caps, and I wasn't really sure what to think. But my first thought was I don't really get this move from the Texans' perspective. It almost seems like, a makeup move after the Hopkins trade. I just thought if they wanted to fill that void at receiver, they'd do it either in the draft in a really deep class, or, maybe they don't trade DeAndre Hopkins, one of the best receivers in the NFL. So for me, it was strange. The Bill O'Brien circus just continues to carry on, and they gave up a second-round pick. They took on that Cooks contract that's pretty large from a cap hit perspective. But outside of the Texans, this is a bit of a spicy take. I actually really like Brandin Cooks in fantasy this year. I think he's going to be undervalued and left for dead. To me, he's the best receiver on this Houston team. I know it's crowded with Cooks, Fuller, Stills, Cobb, Kiki Kuti, and a lot of those guys have similar skill sets. But to me, Brandin Cooks is the best wide receiver there. We act like before this previous season, he wasn't coming off 4 straight 1,000-yard seasons, and that was on 3 different teams. He did it with the Saints, the Patriots, the Rams. Every team he's played for, he's found a way to be super effective. So if he can stay healthy, I think Deshaun Watson is going to feature him in this offense, and I think he's going to get a lot of targets, a lot of air yards. There's 150 vacated targets from DeAndre Hopkins. Last season, Deshaun Watson was 11th in air yards per attempt. The season before that, he was 11th, so he throws the ball downfield more than the average quarterback. And in 2017, he was first. We know he loves to chuck it. We've seen him do it to Will Fuller and Kenny Stills. Now I think Cooks, who is even better than those two guys, is going to find ways to get open. And when you think about how this offense is built, you've got vertical guys in Cooks, Stills, and Fuller, and then Cobb and QT underneath. I think it's going to be really fun to watch. I think they're going to bomb the ball down the field, and it's going to be fun. And if Cook stays healthy, I think he's a really strong wide receiver 3 or a flex play. And to me, I think he's truly going to be left for dead from a fantasy perspective. So if I can stash him on my team as my 3rd wide receiver, or maybe even my 4th, he's going to have a lot of value in good matchups this year, and he's going to have some boom games.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of spiciness baked into that take, but I think a lot of parts I do really agree with. Yeah, I don't know what Bill O'Brien's doing, what he's trying to do here. I think he's just trying to get every deep threat possible and get rid of all of his good players. I do believe in the talent, though, and the ability of Cooks. Like you said, he's had 4 consecutive 1,000-yard seasons prior to this recent one where he missed a couple games with concussion issues. I believe a neck injury at one point that was kind of scary. I see this move as a slight bump to Deshaun Watson. He'll have another field stretcher outside of Will Fuller or Kenny Stills. Across their career, Will Fuller and Brandin Cooks are dead even at 14.3 yards per reception, which actually blew my mind a little bit. I assumed Fuller was going to be way higher. We think of him as such a boom-bust guy. Cooks is also kind of a boom-bust guy for fantasy, but I always picture Will Fuller as way more of a field stretcher, kind of only catching these really deep bombs. Like you mentioned, right, the targets that are open now that Hopkins is gone, I'm sure some of that's going to go to Randall Cobb, Will Fuller, Kenny Stills, of that 150 targets. But Cooks has been in that 115 target range in all of his prime seasons. He had 72 last year while missing 2 games and being banged up, as I said. Yeah, I think my projections for Cooks are pretty reasonable. I have him in line for 80 to 100 targets, a little over 1,000 yards, 4 to 6 touchdowns. He'll be just as boom bust as he ever has been. But if he can get back to that level that we saw him with in his prime, whether it was with New England, the Saints, with the Rams, he could be the Texans' best wide receiver. And I think we look at historically what he's done. I think he is their best wide receiver. With a QB like Watson throwing him the ball, he should have a ton of value. I just don't trust that Cooks is going to play all 16 games. With the scary injuries that he's had, the time that he's missed over the last 2 seasons, I think he's missed a couple of games. You can take a late round flyer on him. I don't mind Cooks at all, for an upside play. We've seen the Texans wide receivers have massive explosion games with Watson slinging it, but I just look at that ADP and I see other names there that are a little more appealing to me if we're going purely for upside. You look at Darius Slayton, you look at Christian Kirk, even names like Preston Williams, you can get around that same ADP. I think that's kind of where I have Cooks in line for as well. But I think I can take a name like Preston Williams, a round or two later, and get pretty similar value. So I'm not as high on Cooks as you might be, but certainly there could be a ton there. He could fall very far in draft. Same thing we said for David Johnson in that Texans offense as well. If he's left for dead, if he falls really far on a draft board, he may actually be a really, really good value. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out and how the Texans make moves going into the draft. Anything else to add here before we get into our first debate?
No, I think that's fair. And Cooks is definitely not a guy I'm drafting to have to rely on every single week. It's more of hoping you can get him as maybe a flex or a not every week starter. And maybe you can snag him and a Preston Williams, snag Cooks and a Darius Slayton to be your wide receiver 3 and 4, and then just flex them in and out based on matchups. So I think we're pretty much in agreement there that Cooks might have some value and he might be left for dead, but the Texans, man, what are you doing? I'm repping my Colts quarter zip today, so the more trades and the more transactions that Bill O'Brien makes, I think the Colts' odds of winning the division go up every single time.
Absolutely.
So love to see it. They're mortgaging their future a little bit with their cap situation and their picks. So as a Colts fan, sure, it's fine.
Another scenario I could see here, just not to harp on Cooks too much, but if it's something where there's some splits, right? If we see Fuller miss 6 games, what's to say that Cooks doesn't get a massive bump in that stretch of those 6 games? So it may be one of those type of deals where you kind of stash him, keep him on your bench, and then when you see Fuller inevitably get hurt, or you see Kenny Stills go out, or Randall Cobb, who's like 30, he go, one of those
or
guys.
Or Cooks go out and you start the other guys.
Yeah, that's true, right? So this is going to be another one, kind of like a revolving door of these different wide receivers that we can be starting on different weeks. I'm sure they're all going to be great DFS options and best ball options.